I'm, I'm gonna start.
Welcome to Athletes in Cannabis, breaking the stigma of laziness. We've got a great show here today. You guys know also Joe Biden, he's hosting a panel discussion for Earth Day today. He's got popes, prime ministers, chancellors, a king, Bill Gates, and Mike Bloomberg. But we here have over 220 people who have signed up for this, so they can watch our broadcast afterward. Today, we've got Shahbaaz Kara, he's representing Dutchy and Canadian Beach Soccer. Zach Greene from Quarter Coast Consulting, and Eli Weigley, he's representing AYR and Lifted Lifting. So welcome, guys. How are you today?
Doing great.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, awesome. You bet. You bet. Well, listen, this is how it's going to work, audience out there. So we've got 4 topics. So I'll go around. I'll ask the topics. These guys are going to respond, and then we'll have some discussion about it. So if you'd like to ask some questions, go ahead in the chat there. And if we can, we'll address those as they come up. And if not, we'll address them afterward, and we'll get back to everybody. So I also want to emphasize that this panel believes in responsible use and that regulation and laws are there for a reason. So many of you may not agree with the laws, but the more discussions that we have like this, the better it is for the industry. All right, so let's jump into the show right here. So Shahbaaz, spend 1 minute telling the audience where you are right now and where you work and who you're representing. Go.
Absolutely, absolutely. And before I do that, I'll say, Benjamin, you, sir, are a king. So don't discount yourself. Hey, everybody, thanks for joining us. My name is Shahbaaz Kara. I am the Canadian sales leader at Dutchy, and this panel is near and dear to my heart. I'm also a athlete, soccer player, and co-founded and used to captain the Canada Beach Soccer, so the Canadian Beach Soccer Club. This is a topic near and dear to my heart. And like Benjamin mentioned, I'm actually in Mexico City right now, so really looking forward to learning more about everybody.
Sounds good. All right, Eli.
How you guys doing? I'm in the beautiful city of Las Vegas, Nevada. Things are opening back up out here, so it's been a lot of fun. Just quick background on myself. Like many of us, came from corporate America and spent a little bit of time in medical sales. And in my time speaking with physicians and general practitioners, I saw a major disconnect in the products being offered for treatment of insomnia and anxiety, things that we've all dealt with. So I decided to pack my bags and immerse myself in the legal market of Las Vegas. Humbling beginnings that started as a receptionist, answering phones and checking IDs, and been blessed enough to have the opportunity to open up my own location in Las Vegas just this past month as a GM at AYR. And, on the side, I'm a co-founder of Lifted Lifting, where we're basically the combination of cannabis and fitness, and we're pushing the movement on how we could uplift each other's lives. And it's been a lot of fun, and look forward to talking more about it.
Awesome. Zach.
How's it going, everybody? Thanks, Ben, for having us here. So Zach Greene, currently in Phoenix right now, but based in St. Louis. I'm a managing partner of Quarter Coast Consulting. And after working about 6 years in DC doing financial consulting with a finance degree from Mizzou, decided to dive into cannabis. I spent 3 years in St. Louis working for a smaller MSO before my business partner and I started Quarter Coast in 2019 to apply for vertical licensure in Missouri. Quarter Coast is a full service consulting firm. We specialize in everything from app writing to things like site selection and even the operationalizing of businesses in the space. We're adamant on kind of our core values, which are, social equity, sustainability, and really trying to find, true partners rather than clients to work with in all the states we go to. So far, we've been in Missouri, Georgia, and West Virginia, and, grew up playing sports, watching sports 24/7. So this is something I'm really excited for, ready to just dive into it.
That's great. Thanks, guys. And I'm Benjamin Ray. I grew up playing sports as well, although it's a whole lot different now when we talk about cannabis use and athletes. Completely different, when I was growing up. I'm here, not here actually at the Colorado Rockies Stadium, but I did want to put a plug in for the Rockies. We won against the Astros yesterday, as well as Nuggets last night. It was a great game. So all those important topics. I also want to say to the audience there is there are about 220 people watching this. It just shows one person up here. That's based on YouTube, but we've got our LinkedIn audience here. So all comments are welcome in here, and we'll try to get to those. All right, let's jump into the first topic. So what are your personal thoughts around cannabis and sports and fitness? You guys can jump in, but let's start with you, Zach.
Yeah, so I mean, great way to start, and I think it's, there's so many ways you can go with this. I think clearly there's a lot more research that needs to be conducted just around cannabis in general. Obviously, it starts at the federal level, but with that being said, I think some of these recent articles and studies that have come out are really showing some interesting progress in terms of what that research looks like. There's support, there's evidence that's starting to support the use of cannabis for recovery, pain, sleep, appetite, as it relates to, being prepared for sporting events. I mean, I think that the, cannabis is something that has been so widely used in this, in this country, but has this stigma around it. And I think that, using it in sport is something that is something that we're just at the beginning and of what that could look like. I mean, I think that ultimately product formulations will really dictate what that is, and additional products will continue to be developed as each state legalizes. I think more and more companies are doing R&D, looking at what products, what terpenes, what minor cannabinoids are impactful as we look into cannabis use as it relates to sports. But in general, I mean, I think so far it's been a lot of recovery for, especially these high impact sports, for athletes that are looking to use it after an event or even before event from a fear standpoint. People getting over prior beliefs that they're trying to kind of clear their head about going into an event. So I think there's just an unbelievable amount of potential. And I think we currently only know cannabis in a way of it's, weed, and it's, it's high THC. But I mean, I think there's so much more potential as we start to dive into additional, terpene formulations, minor cannabinoids, and I can go on forever, but I'll pass it along.
All right. Sounds good. Eli.
Yeah, and definitely to piggyback off of Zach and dealing with the fear and the anxiety, it's something in performance sport that I think is super relevant. I was a basketball player, a shooting guard, and I use cannabis myself in terms of relaxing the nerves and the calming factor before the game to kind of get you into the zone. Now, being in the legal market, what I've noticed is just the level of products that we have available, and how my own personal fitness has raised because of it. So like I'll look for very specific, terpene and cannabinoid profiles before the gym, and I'll look for very different, terpene and cannabinoid profiles post gym. For example, just to throw it out there, alpha pinene. It's a bronchodilator. It gets more air to your lungs, more oxygen to your brain. So that's something I definitely look for in the profiles of sativas before I get to the gym, because it gets me in the zone, keeps me focused. I don't lose that focus in the gym, and I'm able to get through it. Post workout, I'll look for more of those ratios that a lot of people are talking about now, like the THC to CBD 1-to-1 ratios for recovery. Another big one on the terpene profile would be myrcene. It has sedative effects. So in terms of relaxation and recovering your sleep, I've seen a lot of success in myself and, in a lot of our clients as well that use that for recovery. So I just want to throw that out there. Having the access to a consistent lab tested product where I know that I can get the exact same experience every single time has really uplifted my own personal fitness and a lot of other people's that surround us.
Got it. Awesome. And Shahbaaz, when you were on the show before, we talked a little bit about your experience growing up and certainly with the beach soccer. Love to hear about that, about your personal thoughts.
Absolutely. And Zach, well said. Eli, I got to pick your brain on that, man. Definitely. I think there's a lot more that we need to go in terms of utility and to get more scientific in how we approach cannabis in sports. And, you're seeing it from the perspective of even the NFL now is allowing athletes to have their own recovery mechanisms with cannabis, and so the world is changing. For me personally, I've always just learned about cannabis in sports by experimenting with it. So growing up, played a lot of soccer, worked out, ran a whole bunch of different things, and for me, it was always just experimenting with cannabis. And to Eli's point, like when you go into the gym and having a specific type of cannabis, really with the utility around it for making sure that you're focused and getting through a big workout, or even before a half marathon, I smoked a joint, and it was one of the best half marathons I'd ever ran, and I hadn't even trained for it. Not to say that the cannabis was purely the reason why I did well, but it definitely puts you in a different zone. And when you look at things to Zach's points, like recovery and creativity, like one of the best things I love doing is consuming cannabis right before a game, and not to get super high or anything like that. It's just to get a nice touch so that you can dance with the ball a little bit, and you have a little bit more of a creative mindset. And so there's that aspect of it, which is like the experimental side and how that's going to roll out. And then also there's the side of how cannabis is going to help athletes and just the athletic world against opioids, because opioids are just such a deadly thing that drive addiction, that drive a lot of reliance. And so I'm excited to see where that comes to fruition and how the research actually comes about, because that is going to be such a massive industry. And then the final thing I'll say on this is I'm super bullish and really excited for beverages, especially the ones that you can you have to have that utility, and that you're going to get a certain experience from that beverage. My ideal would be like a Gatorade, a THC infused type beverage that drives electrolytes and all sorts of different things. So again, to Zach and to Eli and Benjamin, like we can talk about this all day, but I'm very excited about this topic, and it's something that has been stigmatized for so long that I can't believe that now we get to talk about this, and we're on a panel talking about this.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great thing about this. Like when I was growing up, you never have a conversation like this around sports ever. Never would have happened. So we've come a long way. So second part here of this first topic is, what do you guys think about, the perception that people have just when we say cannabis and sports, not being in the industry, not being part of it? What would the perception be just hearing those words?
I'll start. I think
go ahead. No, go ahead, Eli. You go.
I think just an interesting point, just to follow up on Shahbaaz with the drinks and being interested in new products. I think one of the major misconceptions is that smoking is the only consumption method. So a lot of times people just associate weed or cannabis with a joint or a blunt and the deep smell that's associated with that. But what they don't realize is that, we're selling transdermal patches, lotions, drinks, edibles, tinctures, all sorts of different consumption methods. And I just think that's just one of the biggest misconceptions that people don't realize, is that this is a very wide variety of products that we're offering now.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, just to compound off that, Eli, I mean, even looking at flower and inhalation of flower, I mean, you don't even have to combust it, right? I mean, you look at, if you get a high quality PAX 3 or something like that, and you've got a cannabinoid profile that, like you said, is high in alpha pinene. It's just a perfect profile for pre-sports or pre-fitness. I mean, that is a great way. Burn it at a low temperature. You're not really, impacting your lungs too much, and you're able to really to benefit off that. But yeah, I mean, so many different products. I think the domino starts to fall with CBD. I mean, I think we've obviously seen that, whether you look at a sport like golf, for me, that's kind of where I have the most knowledge around. But just, you've seen some of these players that are starting to, whether it's, being sponsored by CBD brands, but it's from a relaxation standpoint, it makes a lot of sense. But yeah, I think the product suites, as they continue to evolve state to state, that will totally change the perception of people, what they currently think about sports and cannabis, which probably for the most part right now still tends to be, a little bit of laziness, maybe a little bit of lung impact from a workout. And if anything, maybe even just confusion or not being able to concentrate, which ultimately has been proven even in research to not be the case. So yeah, it's interesting.
Eli, what are you seeing? And I'll add on to that, but I'm just curious, man, because that's such a good point. It's such an interesting point. I mean, like, what are you seeing in the store, in the dispensary as, the primary consumption method outside of flower anyways? And, have people come in specifically for, like sports mechanisms? I'm just curious.
That's where a lot of our, my co-founders and I idea for Lifted came from, was working in the dispensaries close to the strip. We would see a lot of actually MMA fighters. I won't use any names, but I know that's really prevalent in the MMA industry, and those guys love edibles in terms of dealing with the anxiety and sleep leading up to fight night. That's definitely a big one. But we do see a lot of just fitness enthusiasts come in too. We're seeing huge success with the ratioed lotions. So the 1-to-1 CBD to THC transdermal lotions, the entourage effect is real. I think CBD isolates and, isolating a lot of these compounds, it's it's good, but the full entourage effect of combining these cannabinoids is where people are seeing the most success. So we're seeing a really active community come in. And I would say, to answer your question, other than flower, I think flower is still, number one, but we're seeing a lot of edibles, tinctures, and lotions from the active community.
That's awesome. My fun story. So my dad used to be a professional cricket player back in Kenya, and he finally purchased cannabis online using Dutchy e-commerce platform. Shameless plug, but it was a big moment because he had just got back from like a run, and his knees were hurting, and so he got some topicals, and that was his first purchase, and that was really eye-opening for me, because again, to everyone's point, it's just like, what is the consumption method? And everyone thinks about it like cannabis in sports, you're lazy, you're smoking, it's bad for your lungs, but there's so many different mechanisms for consuming. And so I'm really excited to see how that rolls out. But I think, just to kind of dive into that point for a quick second here, it's just like, there's so much stigma around cannabis. I mean, I grew up with guys before big games, who would drink a beer or drink a shot before a game, and I would never understand it. It would blow my mind. And meanwhile, I'm like having to take a vape pen and like hide it, and it just blew my mind, because from a performance perspective, like, alcohol's not good for you. You know what I mean? Maybe you have to conquer your nerves or whatever the case is, but it's just wild to see like that misinformation and stigma, and now rolling into where we are today. So I'm excited for the days in which, you can use topicals openly and just be like, yep, this is for my recovery, or whatever the case is. But I think there's still so much to go in terms of the research around the utility. And that's why Eli, Zach, Benjamin, I'm excited to pick your brains, because I'm learning so much from this conversation already.
Yeah, it's great. Good. Well, let's jump into the professional sports then. Like, what is pro sports kind of position, pro or against, and why is that? Let's start with you, Eli.
I think what we're seeing in the past year has been nothing but success. Correct me if I'm wrong, but NFL, NBA, MLB, NHL, all the 4 major sports leagues, and then obviously to trickle down from there into the PGA and the MMA, but have all taken THC off their testing. Some for different reasons than others. In the NFL, the collective bargaining agreement. The NBA was, I know Zach had mentioned, was more of a COVID response, but it's going to lead, hopefully into the right answer. So I think that one of the biggest eye openers would be the NFL. Thankfully they've changed their stance a little bit, but in studies that we see and read about the opioid crisis, the NFL and even the NHL has been hit really hard with this. I read a study recently, I want to say 70 to 75% of former NFL players, this was on a poll of like 400 of them, misused opioids at some point in their career. And it's what the stats say in terms of legal markets with cannabis, 20 to 25% reduction in overdoses and death. So it's like there is a direct correlation with the opioid crisis. And I think specifically in, the NFL, the MMA, the NHL, some of these higher impact sports where they're dealing with the brain injuries and, the neuroprotective properties, from CBD and CBG and, CBN and these things just need to be studied more. And it's just unfortunate that the federal legalization is holding these really strong studies back right now. It looks like, the leagues are doing what they need to do to start changing that.
What have you guys seen, Shahbaaz and Zach?
Zach, you want to go ahead, or you want me to take that first?
Go ahead, Shahbaaz.
Yeah, I mean, it's really. I would echo Eli's point. It's been a really successful year for the major sports leagues, and you even see a couple of guys in the Masters a couple of weeks ago, rocking CBD hats and things like that. I think there's a challenge though, because CBD is such a buzzword now, and there's so many brands around it. So there could be a risk of some misconception, and therefore, like, again, utility around CBD and how that's deployed. Like, there really needs to be like a streamlined kind of concrete conversation on that. But from the overall athlete perspective, I think, as the NBA and as the NFL and all these leagues start to make movements and be more public about it, it's going to be really interesting to see how that hits mainstream consumerism. Because if a guy like LeBron James comes out and starts talking about his cannabis use, or Kevin Durant, Kevin Durant just invested. Kevin Durant's an investor in Dutchy, and now you have a couple other guys who are
Carmelo Anthony.
Carmelo Anthony, yeah. And so it's awesome to see, because I think 99.9% of the world is obviously still legal, but 90% of cannabis consumers aren't even aren't consuming yet. 90% of people aren't consuming cannabis yet. So we haven't really hit a mainstream. But when athletes and all these people that we look up to start to talk openly about it, it just immediately provides so much more awareness. So the fact that all these leagues are coming out and talking about it openly is amazing. And I love the stance that the NFL is taking recently with just, the medical perspective, and, not testing unless like they see abuse or whatever the case is. But the last point I'll say on this is, I was talking with Elias Theodorou. Eli, you mentioned MMA fighters, right? I did an interview with him, and he was talking about the opioid crisis in MMA, and just like how ridiculous it is to like rely on that, and like you get into a spiral of addiction and things like that. But the challenge is, and not to call out big pharma, but is it ever going to get to a point, or when is it going to get to a point where either big pharma gets involved or they push back against kind of what's happening? Because that also takes dollars and things from there, and there's like a whole network of big pharma that you get prescribed certain things, and so it's really interesting to see the movement. But I also wonder, at what point will the movement get pushback from different companies that are producing these opioids?
So when you talk about, barriers, so do you guys think education from sports, celebrities and stars that we look up to, and the endorsements, is that how these are going to be overcome? Is that the conversation, the education, it's okay, like what will it take really for it to become mainstream?
Yeah, I can jump in on that. I mean, I think that, it does start from the top, kind of, Eli, like you were saying. I mean, more research is needed. And kind of just to speak to that, I mean, one of the things I was going to say for your last question, Benjamin, is the NFL actually recently released a request for information on understanding how cannabinoids impact, recovery, and kind of looking at the impact that opioids have had. So Quarter Coast, our group, actually applied for this RFI, or submitted an RFI to the NFL, and who knows what will happen with that and how many groups submitted that. But we put a good team together, and I think groups provided a lot of good research to the NFL that I think will be extremely helpful in them understanding really what goes into all of this. But I do think that ultimately it's going to come to the down to the Kevin Durants and the Carmelo Anthonys and these big names that people have heard of, that really want to put themselves out there and understand there's an issue. And even speaking to that a little bit in the NFL, I mean, kind of some of the things we're talking about, I mean, I think as you look at the industry and kind of the really the war on drugs and the disparate impact on people of people of color in as it relates to cannabis, I mean, it really relates right to sports. Basically, there's a lot of issues, especially if you look at college sports, where you're talking about, there's kids that have plentiful opioids at their disposal at any point after a game. And, they get one possession charge for, smoking a joint after a game, and they can lose their scholarship, and that scholarship is their livelihood. And, there's a high probability too that they may be one of the first people in their families to get a scholarship or go to college. So it really, again, it talks to the system at large. I think there's a lot of challenges that we need to overcome. And, like everything else, everything's interconnected. So I think sports is at the precipice and really can be influential in that matter as well.
The point about opioids, I think, is a really important one. The more studies that are done side by side, comparing the two, I think will make a big difference. But, as you said, there haven't been really federal grants to do that. I mean, some's happening here in Colorado, a few disparate ones, but there's not that much information, on it and that much success. But I think, the more that studies are done, people will see it as a healthy, responsible alternative to opioids, because people have pain. When you work out, you have pain, a lot of things like that. And there are terrible addictions, not to mention cocktails and all that stuff that are dangerous. So the more that's done, the more it's talked about, the more education. I think you guys are all on the right track there. So
yeah, definitely. I'll quickly add on to that. I think to the question, like, how do we make this more, accessible? And I mean, just talking through this just makes me realize how big this topic is,
yeah.
and how complicated it is. Because sports really touches, a vast majority of humans. But I think one of the biggest things that we can do, or athletes can do, is continue to just like share their stories, the good ones, the bad ones. It's, because at the same time as there's this medical aspect of things, Zach, you just mentioned it, there's also this cultural aspect, and there's also this, this challenge with cannabis being illegal in, a lot of states, but legal some states. And, how do you work around the 50 different cannabis industries that are in North America today, and how do you regulate that, and how do you monitor that from a sports perspective? So I think it's just athletes need to continue to just like push the boundaries and share their stories. I think it'd be really cool for an athlete to go on Players Tribune, for instance, and like write about their experience maybe in the past with cannabis and now how that's changing. Like, I would love to hear about Carmelo Anthony, and why he chose to invest and how those things. But sports humans are influential figures, and naturally in the world of Twitter and social media, I mean, people are always looking for tribes. So I think that's the biggest way to just drive like consumerism and knowledge into the space.
Yep.
I think as more of this is talked about, what I've seen too, and this in conversations I've had with some professionals, when they're free agents, they want to go to the recreational market. They have a selling point to get them there. So it's like, I don't know if the teams use that to their advantage or not. But I know if I were a professional athlete, I would choose Denver or LA over, certain markets, knowing that I could, properly medicate, and just kind of to hit on my point on the regulation and the lab tested products, and not buying in the black market where you don't know, what you're consuming.
So who are the Broncos going to draft for a quarterback then? Hard to say, right? Yeah, could be an attractive point there. That's great.
That's a good point.
I want to get back to this. Really the point of this laziness and the stigma around it. And we talked about just smoking. About that consumption, that it makes you lazy. So why, in general, do you think the mainstream, as well as some athletes, think that cannabis use makes you lazy? And start with you, Shahbaaz.
That's such a good question, Ben. I think it's how you define lazy. Like, I could be called lazy because I'm good at finding out how to cut corners and do things faster and more efficient. And cannabis, truthfully, just allows me to do that, right? It allows me to be more present, be more aware. I think the idea around lazy is because everyone has a preconceived notion around, what cannabis was, right? Versus like what it is today. And the fact of the matter is, a lot of people don't understand dosing. They don't understand, the knowledge. And I told you, I learned about cannabis by experimenting with it. Sometimes you smoke, a heavy indica, for instance, or a heavy indica dominant, for instance, and maybe you are actually locked into the couch and you're like, I'm not going to go for that run. So a lot of it is knowing what the type of cannabis you're consuming, the dosing requirements, and the appropriate doses, and the consumption method, to what we've been speaking about. But for me, cannabis makes me, it almost feels like it gives me superpowers in the gym and running and things like that, and allows me to think clear. But I think it's like a redefinition of like lazy, because I can tell you one thing, like I do a lot, like we found the Canadian beach soccer team, like we've done all these different things in sports, but I can't yet talk to my team about cannabis because of this laziness stigma. And so one of my goals going back, and why I kind of tagged the Canadian team on this and like some players, is to showcase that, like, there's a lot going on here with this. So yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting point, and I think the stigma of the media, how it's communicated, how it's been communicated, how immigrant families have looked at cannabis. You know what I mean? Like, my family's from Kenya. Like, cannabis was a no-no. So I think there's a lot into that. I would love to hear your thoughts, Eli, Zach.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's a lot of misinformation, and I think propaganda is very real. We all remember the commercial of the girl on the couch that looked like a flattened balloon, just laying there, and that's stuck in a lot of people's mind. It's still in mine, and I'm immersed in the industry. So I think there's something to be said about what we were led to believe all these years, and it wasn't even until that long ago that we've kind of started to break the barriers a little bit. So I think that the misinformation has been a tough barrier to get over, but educating the public, doing things like we're doing now, and just like Shahbaaz said, sharing our stories. Not to over promote lifting, but that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to share our personal fitness stories and other people's that have had success using cannabis, and it's definitely a trial and error thing. And that's why we want to share it as much as we can, because it's going to help each other. It's going to help us, find the proper methods and, break past that laziness barrier.
Totally. Well, Eli, I'm glad you mentioned lifting there, because I was gonna make you do that if you didn't. So, yeah, excited to see that continue to evolve. But yeah, I think that's kind of you guys are exactly right. You both kind of hit the nail on the head there. I see on the bottom, Dr. Palakar, sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, talking about a big cannabis corporate company sponsoring a team, and that's when the turnaround will begin. And I agree with you. I agree with that a lot. I think it really, there's going to be a time when you're going to see, first of all, people are going to know the names of these big companies in the country, and who knows whether it's going to be the current MSOs or, down the road, if those companies end up being the, AOLs and the MySpaces, and there's, the Googles and the, Facebooks are still to come, but we will see what that looks like. But I think once that happens, and once those companies start to sponsor and work with the industry, and that reaches mainstream media, not, no offense to LinkedIn, but, when it's a generational gap, right? I mean, once it starts reaching the news and NBC and people that are, don't necessarily get on and consume as much content as some of the people that we may know, that's, I think, when you're going to really see large scale change and that stigma really begin to shift. So I think again, it kind of starts from the top, but I do think that when we get bigger companies involved and they're able to actually confidently be able to advertise and promote what they're doing without the concern from a federal standpoint, then I think that's when things will really start to evolve.
My perception is, when I was growing up, that people would just, smoke a joint, and it would be, who knows what was in it. You had no idea about terpenes or anything like that. And people would overconsume because it was really just to get high. So that, that still exists, that people just smoke to get high. So the argument against, rec or legal is still that. And I think that sticks in a lot of people's minds, especially, if you're older, but there's so much more to it now, especially when you think of it from the medicinal side, even though, same stuff, used recreationally can be for medicinal purposes, but really just that perception that of the overconsumption, and then you don't want to do anything, and you do want to just sit on the couch or whatever it is, or it makes you can't think or whatever it is, just being overly high. So, all the things with the cannabinoids and the terpenes and microdosing and the different consumption methods, completely different from the old perception. And the more that we talk about it, especially with, as you said, the generations, coming up in sports, the more it's going to become mainstream. So it may just be time, 5-10 years with people who are younger, who are more confident and use cannabis responsibly in sports, that it's just going to become that way over time. And then once there's the purchasing power and the mainstream starts to think it's okay, then you are going to see bigger brands sponsoring like it's no big deal, like we're seeing in golf already, as of the Masters.
Sure. Yeah, Weedmap sponsoring, I think, the boxing match a couple. I forget who was boxing, but I think it was Tyson boxing. Yeah, it was Tyson, right?
Yeah,
that was pretty big, right? Like that was a huge step forward in corporate sponsorship from a cannabis company, regardless if it was in cannabis tech or not. But I totally agree with all that. Yeah.
Yeah.
still a frustrating watching the Super Bowl. You know, we're seeing all the beer commercials, and it's like we talked about the NFL specifically, and trying to make waves in this. That was it was frustrating this year in the Super Bowl. I'm hoping next year we see some big advertisements.
Yeah.
So Eli, when guys come into when people, men and women, come into your store to buy and they ask you about different effects and stuff like that, are they comfortable talking about that, or are they still kind of looking over like, I don't know if I should be here type of thing?
And I think that, it says a lot about the atmosphere and the culture you build inside of your dispensary. Education is key. I think, I spent my time as a bud tender as well. And I think it's the most important position in the industry, hands down, because they're the ones consulting these people that are coming in, and you could literally change someone's life in one consultation and change their entire perception in one consultation. We've seen, people come in with different, serious ailments for like serious medical reasons that nothing has worked, just to kind of reel back to big pharma, but they've, spent years trial and erring everything they could. And cannabis has been the only thing that's worked. So I think that, there is still some stigma around being inside of a dispensary, but, having a welcoming, opening, culture inside of the dispensary that's really focused on education, I think is going to be one of the key pieces in lifting this stigma.
So would they talk about it afterward? Like, have you guys seen professional athletes purchase some cannabis? Would they talk about it outside to the outside world?
So that's what's tough. And I think that, in the different leagues, there's slightly different regulations on what they could do. We talked about, Kevin Durant and Carmelo Anthony, John Wall and these guys investing, but in the MLB, they're not even allowed to not only be endorsed, but they can't even invest in cannabis companies. So a lot of these guys, if you're in the majors and you're aspiring to be, one of the best in the world, there's different endorsements like, Nikes and these big firms that probably aren't going to like or love your endorsement in cannabis at this point. So I think that some of these high level guys are a little bit hesitant because they know that some of the other endorsements that they could lose out on. It's just
so contractually they wouldn't be allowed to.
Yeah, I know for sure in the MLB, like contractually they can't. Some of these guys it's a little bit looser, but they're probably also looking out for their own best interest in terms of sponsorships and endorsements from some of the bigger sports companies.
Yeah. What are you guys seeing in that in let's say golf and soccer?
Yeah, just to chime in on the golf side. I know there's rumors of, I think, Phil Mickelson in the 2019 Masters with CBD. I think what's really interesting with the PGA is they have a zero tolerance policy, really, and they base it off of I think it's the World Anti-Doping Agency, and they basically say that all cannabinoids are prohibited, natural and synthetic. So they're kind of saying that we're not going to be able to change on our end until there's real change that happens at that WADA level. But you're seeing these players. Phil Mickelson, Bubba Watson, Patrick Reed. I don't know if this is true or not, but I know there's even rumors of Tiger, with some CBD when he won the Masters. Yeah, chewing some CBD gum. So yeah. I personally, I'll be honest. When I go out and play around and I have a half of CBD before my round, I'm always more confident out there. I'm way in my head way too much. So if I have a little CBD before the round, that's always helpful. But no, I think it's really interesting. And Eli, just to kind of piggyback really quick, the education piece is so important. At every level, but really where you're at, ground level, talking to those patients, to the the rec users, to these athletes that come in. I just had an experience a couple nights ago where I just asked the bud tender, what strains and what cultivars they have with higher CBD percentage, and couldn't even answer the question for me. And that's not even that's not with sports. That's a very simple question. So I think your bud tenders, your patient care advocates, they need to be very well educated on a myriad of subjects, and sports is one of them. So I think it's again, it starts from that education piece. But yeah, I'll kick it to Shahbaaz for his thoughts.
I can't wait to get on the course with you, man. I'm excited. I'm way too much in my own head as well when I play.
Once you make it up north, you got to.
Yeah, exactly. Well, when it's not locked down anymore. Soccer's an interesting one because whereas the NFL, NBA, they're North American leagues, and this is happening in North America. Soccer, we have the MLS, and that's perfect. And Eli, you said something earlier about if I'm an athlete, I'm more inclined to go to like recreational markets, and how that actually ties into contracts and things like that. I think that's such a cool point that I'd love to discuss at some point further. But for soccer, it's interesting because there's still a very hardline stance on like no on cannabis, because you look at the governing bodies and just where they come from. You look at the the leagues in Europe, and even like Turkey, and like all these big teams are in such places where cannabis is still so illegal. And MLS, they're starting to change their stance. And I know Beckham, for instance, invested in a CBD brand and things like that, and that's fantastic. But for soccer, I think there's still such a long way to go with just overall understanding the plant, just because we get access to all this information. We can have this conversation right now, and it'd be great. But like, if you're looking at other countries where soccer is absolutely massive, like beach soccer, for instance, Iran has an amazing beach soccer team. They're number one in the world. You can't talk about cannabis in Iran. You can't talk about any of that sort of stuff. So
not even zero THC hemp CBD.
And like even if you do, and that's allowed, you're gonna get outcasted big time by your family, by like everything, right? Like even in Italy, they have CBD that they're allowed to sell. And I remember talking to one of the guys from the Italian beach soccer team, and they were all consuming cannabis and things like that, but like they were in a corner at a party later on. Like no one was talking about it openly in terms of like how this is going to affect our sport. It was more of an enjoyment thing. So I think like this conversation about like recovery, creativity, health, all these different things hasn't even permeated that, because they can't talk about cannabis regularly, let alone for sports. So I'm excited. I'm wearing my PSG jersey, Zlatan. If a guy like Zlatan was to get on the cannabis train, I guarantee you, there'd be a lot more information that comes out. But I'm excited to see how that rolls out. And, this is maybe the time where the MLS, for instance, can be a leader in soccer for the first time versus, and some of the other leagues, the European leagues and things like that will follow.
Maybe a major cannabis company would have supported the Super League, right?
Super League, ridiculous. Maybe.
Two-day league, right? Well, we've got a comment here from Brandon. Detroit City Football Club minor league has dispensary on their roster, Pleasantries. So know that.
Very cool.
So going to happen here. Well, you guys all kind of touched on performance a little bit. So what I'd like to do is really talk about that is, we know about CBD, how that can reduce soreness and stress and aid in focus. But let's talk about something that one of you guys said about increasing lung capacity. So how does sports really help? How does cannabis really help you guys personally, and other stories we've heard? How does it enhance your performance?
I'll kind of kick that one off. I know I mentioned earlier about, the alpha pinene is a terpene that I specifically will look for in terms of doing any sort of endurance or, weightlifting, because it is a bronchodilator. It gets more air to your lungs and more oxygen to your brain. So it just, like I said, gives you that focused, alert energy. But when it comes to performance as well, I think it's deeper than that. And speaking with a lot of professional athletes, dieting is a really big thing that cannabis coincides with. Everybody knows about the munchies, but there are times where it's like athletes are looking to gain weight, so they are looking for certain profiles that will give them the munchies, so they could actively eat and gain weight. On the other side of that, there are I've had athletes that enjoy the use of cannabis but are on a very strict weight regimen from their club, where they can't be over a certain weight when they report back. Humulene is a terpene that we'll look for, that's known to be an appetite suppressant. So we'll find profiles like that for these guys where they can enjoy cannabis in their regimen but not have the munchie factor and still keep a close weight. And then just to kind of piggyback on a few other things like recovery and sleep, we're just seeing a lot of, new minor cannabinoids come to the market. 2021 has been huge with CBN. It's the sleep cannabinoid. So ratios, one of our best selling gummies at the dispensary is a 2 to 1 to 1, which has like 10 milligrams of CBN, 5 milligrams of CBD, and 5 milligrams of THC, and it's great for sleep. And we just talk about when that's needed in your recovery and in your overall wellness regimen. It helps a lot of people.
That's fascinating stuff, Eli. Appreciate a lot of that's all educational to me. So that's great
knowledge right there.
Yeah, it really is. That's
keep an eye out for CBG in this year. And it's the mother cannabinoid. So it's like it basically creates THC and CBD. So in terms of the effects as a neuroprotectant and some of the stomach effects where people are dealing, Crohn's and some of these other IBS, CBG has been shown to help them a lot as well.
So when someone comes in and they're talking about all these things like terpenes and cannabinoids, do you think a lot of bud tenders then know what to recommend for sports? Or is that something that really needs to be, by the brands, go in, give education with athletes, for athletes, so it isn't just like, oh, I like this label over here, or they get a spiff or whatever, from the brand. How can it really help athletes by understanding this stuff?
Yeah, I think, one thing too, just to kind of jump in on that. I mean, I think is we all need to remember in this industry and just cannabis in general with this plant is that we all are different, and all of our endocannabinoid systems are different. So we all, even though there's a CBG, CBN, in general it has this impact. It may be different from person to person. We're all unique. So I think kind of that start slow, start low, go slow methodology makes a lot of sense when it comes to dosing, and really being, kind of cognizant of, this may have worked for somebody, but it may not work for somebody else. And kind of like you said, Eli, with the, using cannabis as a, whether it's an, increases your appetite or decreases your appetite, it depends on the terpene profile, the, cannabinoid profile. But there are studies that have actually, been conducted showing that cannabis users have, in fact, a lower BMI and body fat compared to non-users, and that's really interesting. Where in terms of just your endocannabinoid system, and by properly using it, you actually are able to really activate your endocannabinoid system in a way that many people that don't use it don't realize. So I think there's so much from an educational standpoint that needs to be. We all still need to learn, and obviously this R&D that continues to happen from state to state will help with that. But I think just remembering that it's, it is very much person to person is important.
For sure.
I think that's a really good point with dosing. We talk about educating ourselves on the profiles and the terpenes and the cannabinoids, but recommending the proper dosing, starting slow, is big. We've seen a lot of people like in our parents' generation that have been turned off of cannabis because of poor experience, and it's probably because they overdid it in a batch of brownies where it wasn't mixed in all the way properly. So it's like they don't know if they did 50 milligrams or 10 milligrams. So I think that the microdosing and education of the bud tenders to notice a new patient or somebody new to the industry and to not assume that everybody's there just to get as high as possible. That's not
for sure.
Yep.
Yeah. And I'll quickly just add on, just real quick. I mean, Dr. Eyal Polikar, mentioned that, guys, rec isn't the new med for sports. It has to stay med. I think that's so, a very good point, but I do think it's so challenging, this boundary between rec and medical. I mean, in cannabis in general, but then you toss in sports. I mean, at what point does, rec go, or like medical go to rec and rec go to medical? And so I think that's definitely something that is like such a deep talking point that, we've kind of been traversing around the two a lot. And I think, in order for, I wrote about this on LinkedIn the other day, but like, the world needs to go back, and that's medical. And that's the way kind of, the world's going to turn, especially in like places like, I mentioned Turkey, Iran, things like that. But I think there's such a, like what's the word I'm looking for? There's such a like blurred line on the rec and medical aspect.
But the thing about it is that, are you talking about legal? Because it's the same plant. It's the same.
For sure. Exactly.
Medical is subsidized by states, but it's the same stuff. So when you talk about rec versus med, it's really the designation of the jurisdiction. But if you're using it as a patient, whatever, it's the same. So that's why it's tricky, because you go into a rec or a med dispensary or one that has both, you're going to get what you need, based on the
For
effects
you.
that it's going to work for you, not whether you go into a med or a rec, dispensary.
Yeah, and I'll tell you firsthand, the dispensary I just opened, we only received a recreational license. Most dispensaries out here have a medical and a recreational license. We're recreational only. By no means does that mean the patients coming in aren't seeking, medical, advice on this.
Right.
So it's just because they didn't go through the steps to, pay a doctor for a medical card, and it just doesn't seem authentic. So it just, when it comes to like the rec, they're still rec patients. Everybody has deficiencies in their endocannabinoid system that they're looking to fulfill. So it's like, whether they have a medical card that they paid a couple $100 for online or not, they're still medical patients that are coming in.
Yeah, and we have to make the designation here, distinction, that rec doesn't mean you just use it to get high. Medical means you use it to ease pain. It is not that. And that's one thing about the stigma that we were talking about. So I'm glad you brought that up, Shahbaaz, and thank you for the comment here, is that it is controversial. There is stigma, and by talking about it, that's how we're going to get through this. So,
absolutely.
Sure.
I wanted to go back to something that Brandon said here. What's been beneficial when we were talking about the sponsorships, local training and outreach to the families of youth that naturally carries dispensary along with it has to be able to break that down. So generationally, in sports, it is going to happen. But a lot of the people who are, let's say, 60, 70, 80, was nowhere near something they could talk about growing up in sports.
For sure.
So.
Yeah, and I want to address that, Brandon, too, because for me, my Instagram is full of cannabis content, and it's also full of beach soccer content. And one of the things that we do is we run elite level training for great teams and great clubs who haven't trained on the sand before, as a way to showcase different skill sets, drive a bunch of different things on the sand. The sand's obviously different than grass pitch, and I often get in a little bit of a challenging position because on one hand, I'm representing Canada Beach Soccer, and we're trying to get these children to come out and these clubs to come train with us. But on the other hand, these clubs that I'm reaching out to on Instagram and I'm developing relationships with are also seeing me post cannabis content, and it's challenging in Canada because as a dispensary or as a retailer, you can't actually sponsor anything. You can't do any of those community outreach and education programs for the community, which I think is really, it's really challenging and restrictive, because then that puts us at such a huge disadvantage for actually being able to talk to those parents about the right things and drive the right education. So that's a really interesting point, and it's something that I was thinking about a lot, because it puts us in a precarious position big time. And am I jeopardizing my beach team and the trainings that I'm trying to run with them because of my career in cannabis? And that's obviously why I'm here. I'm trying to merge the two. But yeah, I'd love your thoughts on that, because that's a really, really interesting phenomenon and situation.
I think it's going to be challenging, and it has to be what each person is comfortable with or not. But as long as you're talking about responsible use and regulation, what's legal, what's not, talking about that is what's important, because then it gets it on the table. Education is the key, as we've said so many times. So people are going to have perceptions that you can't control, but you can talk about what's important in terms of responsibility. And just you saying that conflict that you had with sports, whatever that is important, because a lot of people won't even have this discussion. And that's why what you guys are doing, talking about this, and this panel is extremely valuable, just to get it out in the open.
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, just because we're talking about it and we're all proponents, doesn't mean there aren't challenges, right? There's kids obviously that are involved that we need to, think about. Yeah. And, obviously, Eli, you're probably very, closer than all of us about just with, from a day-to-day standpoint with packaging and, child-resistant packaging. But there needs to be kind of this, thread that needle on how do you promote and how do you advertise, while also realizing that, yes, there needs to be protections against the youth. But cannabis is so interesting. It's not like alcohol. It's not like, it's not like coffee. There's a medical side. There's this, there is an adult use recreational side, but it is that blend that's so unique that I think we just kind of collectively have to really continue to experiment and figure out what the best way is to promote it. Because at the end of the day, this plant has so many benefits, and the fact that it's been, the stigma and I mean, just demonized is unbelievable. So again, it's a collective effort, I think, but it's really interesting just looking at the different angles.
Yeah, and I think it's 100. I was just gonna say, I just think it's just really obvious that this is gonna be the avenue that lifts the stigma when it comes to athletes in sports and cannabis in sports. The highest level athletes, if they can show what they're using and what they're doing and still be the best in the world, I don't understand where the stigma can come from anymore. Yeah. So I think that it's going to take some of these high level athletes to kind of come out of the closet per se when it comes to their cannabis use. And just like you said, Shahbaaz, LeBron James, talks about it. I think that a lot of parents that have their kids in these youth leagues, they may rethink their stance on it. Like, well, I mean, it's LeBron James. He's the best in the world. He's been the best in the world for 17 years. I'm not even saying that he uses this, but I'm just, if a guy like that came out and said it, I think that's what's going to lift the perception and the misconceptions.
I've got a question here I want to read for you guys from Jake Hammock. It's a good one applying to this. This is exactly the path for athletic organizations to be exploring in breaking through lazy social stigma via enhanced performance. What do you believe will occur in both collegiate and professional sports leagues now that cannabis is being openly advertised for research university scholarships in the U.S.? So great discussion. What do you guys think about that?
I can start off. I mean, really, I think that we talked about earlier, and Eli, you let us off, but I mean, all these organizations are making strides and taking steps in the right direction. But I still think that it starts at the top. I mean, the fact that it is a controlled substance Schedule I drug at this point makes it really challenging for these different organizations, for the NCAA to change their policy. Now, I think there needs to be some effort. You can't just sit around and wait. And, like example for the PGA, waiting for the WADA to come out and say, oh, we're going to change our policy. No, you can push them along. You have enough power as an organization that's bringing in billions of dollars. You can make that change, and you can be play a role in it. But I think it ultimately does start from the top. But yeah, I mean, I think that we're getting to a point here where that tide is really starting to turn, and we're all seeing it. I mean, day in and day out.
Yep.
Yeah,
I think from a collegiate standpoint, I played Division II basketball, so it was a much smaller scale. But I did see firsthand some of these guys go through major surgeries like MCL, ACL, and have the opioids and the prescription pills readily available, through our trainers, whoever it may be, and to be criminalized, if you smoked a joint 2 weeks prior and it popped up on a drug test, just how, Zach said, you could lose a scholarship. It's tough. So I don't know what's going to happen at the collegiate ranks just because of the age. But I think when we come from strictly a medicinal standpoint and the opioid epidemic and the type of injuries that you see in sports and college, I think that they got to have a plan B ready to go here pretty soon, even if that's, some of these minor cannabinoids, CBD, low THC stuff. But it's, I think, their overall health is going to rely on this here sooner than later.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of colleges are, investing in cannabis courses now as well, right? Green Flower, Max Simon, his team, they're doing some great work. They're striking some great partnerships. So I'm curious to understand those colleges and universities that have those programs, if that carries over into the sporting side of things. And Zach, to your point, it's challenging because NCAA still governs it, and from a federal perspective. And so it's just going to be really curious to understand if athletes choose, specific universities or colleges based on what programs they have. And then again, if that bleeds into the fact that, from a medicinal perspective and all the teams, doctors and things like that are embracing cannabis as well. And that could be a huge competitive differentiator if, from one college to the next, especially with how competitive the NCAA really is. So I'm excited to see how it shakes out.
We've got a couple minutes here, and I wanted to get your thoughts here on performance enhancement as a drug, from Mark McGuire, Barry Bonds, Lance Armstrong, what will happen if cannabis is used, and how will it be seen in a positive light versus saying you can't do this because it enhanced your performance?
I think that's a slippery slope, but I think it's one that we're going to see come about here. And I mean, I think that cannabis, I mean, we're talking about different formulations and R&D and different product types. I mean, Eli and I were talking about this yesterday. There are going to be products created that are incredible that none of us can ever imagine, and they're going to be proven, safe and healthy, and there's going to be no issue at all with taking them before sports, except for the fact that you're going to see players, probably perform a lot better than other players that don't do it. So I think it's going to end up coming down to those organizations, or to the organizations of the professional sports leagues, to determine whether or not they're going to allow those products to be used. And to me, it's kind of I think at that point, I think you're just really just going to be suppressing just performance, because as long as they're proven safe and healthy, it's like saying, again, I hate to keep bringing golf up, but a player can't use this driver, or the ball has to be, less powerful because they don't want you hitting the ball 380 yards. Well, I mean, if people are, optimizing their performance, let them keep going. The game needs to change. So it'll be interesting to see. We're not there yet. I mean, as it currently is, there's still a long way to go till we get to some of those different product types, but we're on the way for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just kind of comes down to looking at it in a different light, like overall health and wellness, and then not as a drug. When we think of Mark McGuire and the steroids, and it was detrimental and harmful to your bodies. Where it comes to cannabis, it's we're seeing the beneficial factors. So it's I would like to look at it in more of a light, like this is something you could consult with somebody at a supplement store with too. You know what I mean? We're not talking about something hardcore to your liver or to your internal organs here. We're talking about cannabis in a very plant medicine healthy way.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially the way, it interacts with your endocannabinoid system. But, and the fact that it's natural, but I do think, and to echo Zach's point, I do think that's it's such a slippery slope, and there's going to be a lot of pushback, and it's going to be a conversation that is going to be really, really complex to navigate. And it hasn't hit us yet, but it will the more cannabis athletes that come about. So definitely curious to understand just how that is even derived, and more importantly, the forum for discussion around that is going to be really, really interesting.
Awesome. Well, that's all we have time for, guys. Any closing remarks, Zach?
Nothing really. I mean, again, just, Benjamin, thank you for having us here today. I think this is such a great conversation to have. I mean, again, I think everything's so interconnected in this industry, for everything. I know you've had, a lot on sustainability, wellness, sports. I mean, all of that I think comes together, and this industry is such an amazing potential to really change the world. So again, just having this conversation, Eli and Shahbaaz, I mean, hearing your guys' perspectives, I'm excited to just kind of keep doing this. I would love to do this, every month, honestly, and just keep the conversation going, just, having calls. So I would love to continue, but yeah, really enjoyed being here, Benjamin. Appreciate it.
Bet. Eli.
Yeah, thank you so much, Benjamin. I appreciate the invite. If anybody's interested in checking out what we got going on with Lifted Lifting, definitely check us out on Instagram. It's our main platform right now. It's just @LiftedLifting_. And it's we have a lot of fun with it, guys. It's we do a lot of pre-workout, a lot of fun, smoking and consumption videos, but just kind of based around lifting the stigma and showing that we could do these kind of things and still be high level in our fitness and outside of fitness as well. High level at what we're doing in our careers as well is something we're definitely pushing with the Lifted Lifting movement.
It's great, Shahbaaz.
Benjamin, first and foremost, thank you. You're an incredible moderator, and just so much discussion to be had. To echo Zach's point, would love to continue these discussions. Eli, Zach, I learned a lot from you guys. Thanks so much. For me, I just think that we're on the cusp of something incredible within cannabis, and cannabis in sports is going to be one of the most massive things to hit us, and our ability to navigate it is only just starting. So I'd welcome if anyone who's listening or watching has anything that they feel that they want to share, or they come across something, please hit me up on LinkedIn, and let's create the discussion and let's keep going, because I'm really curious. And then lastly, shameless plug, but follow at Can Beach Soccer on Instagram, and show the Canadian beach soccer team your love. And again, thanks everyone for having me on.
Yeah, great, guys. So audience, thank you very much. Any comments? There's so many comments you guys put in here, questions. We weren't able to get to those, but we will get to everyone after this. And please do continue commenting. So if anybody in the audience there has links, you can put those in. Mike Wise, he's got a petition out there. There's a copy of that. So I encourage all of you to ask questions of any of us here, and definitely keep the conversation going. So thanks, everyone. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.